Hey guys, tonight we are going to turn our attention away from the grand tapestries of history, the battles, the coronations, the rise and fall of kings. Instead, we are going to a much smaller place, a darker, more confined, and infinitely more common space. We are going to the moment of your birth. We are going to explore what it meant to draw your first breath in the Middle Ages, when the single greatest determinant of your entire life's trajectory was revealed. We are going to examine the brutal, unforgiving reality that began with the simple, devastating announcement: it's a girl. This is the story of that lottery, the one you lost the moment you were born. This is the story of your life, beginning with the original sin of being female in a world that did not want you. Close your eyes. Let the world outside fade away. There is no gentle, sterile, brightly lit room awaiting your arrival. There is no doctor in a white coat, no reassuring beeps of machinery. There is only a room, small and close, thick with the smells of human life pushed to its limit. The air is heavy with sweat, blood, and the metallic tang of fear. It is tinged with the smoke of a tallow candle or a single rushlight, its flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls. A draft snakes its way in through a gap in the wooden shutter, carrying the scent of damp earth, animal manure, and the cold night air. The floor beneath you, or rather, beneath the pallet of straw on which your mother lies, is packed earth, cold and unyielding. This is the birthing chamber, a sacred space, in its own way, but one sealed off from the world of men. Childbirth is a woman's mystery, a polluting, terrifying, and exclusively female event. Here, there is only your mother, her body contorted in the final, agonizing throes of labor, and around her, a small cohort of women from the village or the household. At the center of this grim theater is the midwife. She is not a trained medical professional in any sense we would understand. Her knowledge is a precarious blend of hard-won experience, passed down through generations, and a thick layer of superstition. Her hands are unwashed. Her tools are simple, a birthing stool perhaps, some rags of questionable cleanliness, and a collection of herbs and prayers meant to appease a god who seems, in this moment, particularly cruel. The final push, a cry, thin and startling in the tense silence of the room. You are born. You are slick with blood and fluid, gasping in your first shocking lungfuls of cold, smoky air. But before you are swaddled, before your mother's relief can even set in, there is a critical, silent inspection. The midwife, or perhaps your grandmother, lifts you. In the dim, uncertain light, her eyes search for the one thing that matters, the one detail that will define you, your value, and your entire future. And then the verdict is delivered. It is not shouted with joy. There is no celebration. Instead, a quiet sigh might pass through the room, a subtle deflation. The other women might offer words of comfort to your mother, not congratulations. The words, "It is a girl," land in the small, crowded space, not as a happy announcement, but as a statement of fact, tinged with resignation and a hint of shared sorrow. Your existence, from these first few seconds, is already framed by disappointment. If you are born into a peasant family, a family whose life is tethered to the soil and the seasons, your birth is an economic reality, and the reality is stark. You are another mouth to feed from a pot that is never quite full. You are a body that, while useful for certain tasks, will never possess the raw physical strength of a son for the back-breaking work of ploughing the fields with a heavy, ox-drawn plough. A son is an investment in the family's future labor force, a guarantee that the land will be worked, that the family name will continue. You, however, are a debt. From the moment you are born, a mental ledger is opened. Every spoonful of pottage, every scrap of bread you consume is noted against the eventual, significant cost of your dowry. For you to marry, Your family must provide something of value to your future husband's family. It might be a cow, a handful of sheep, a few precious strips of land, a sturdy iron pot, or a set of new linens. These are not trivial things. For a family living on the razor's edge of subsistence, a cow can be the difference between survival and starvation. Your marriage, the event your entire childhood will be geared towards, represents a significant depletion of your family's wealth. Your father, looking at your small, wrinkled face, does not see a beloved daughter so much as he sees a future expense, a complication in the brutal arithmetic of medieval life. If, by chance, you are born into the cold stone walls of a castle to a noble family, the disappointment is of a different sort, but no less profound. It is dynastic, it is political. Your father, a lord, a baron, or a duke, needs a son. His entire world, his legacy, his very identity, is tied to the continuation of his bloodline through a male heir. A son inherits the land, the title, the power. A son prevents the family's holdings from being divided, or worse, reverting to the crown, or being passed to a distant, rival cousin. Your birth denies him this. As you lie there, swaddled in finer cloth than your peasant counterpart, but in a room no less fraught with tension, your arrival is a political setback. You are not an heir. You are a tool, a pawn to be used later in the complex game of medieval diplomacy. You will be a bride, bartered for a strategic alliance, your marriage sealing a treaty, or patching up a feud. Your value is extrinsic, measured in the political advantage you can bring, but you cannot carry the family name. You cannot lead men into battle. The celebrations for your birth will be polite, formal, and hollow. The relief that your mother survived the ordeal will be real, but it will be immediately overshadowed by the silent, pressing question that now hangs over the entire household. When will she produce a son? In this world that greets you with such a profound lack of enthusiasm, your very survival is not a given. The high infant mortality rate of the Middle Ages is a well-known historical fact, but it masks a darker, more deliberate reality. If the burden of your birth is deemed too great, your fate might be decided in the first few hours or days. This is the practice of exposure. It is a quiet, passive form of infanticide. You might be tightly swaddled and left at a crossroads, at the gates of a distant monastery, or on the steps of a church. It is not seen as outright murder, but rather as leaving your fate in the hands of God or the kindness of strangers. More often than not, it is a death sentence, delivered by exposure to the elements or the teeth of a passing animal. Even if you are kept, your hold on life is more tenuous than that of a male sibling. In times of famine or sickness, when resources are scarce, the choices made are brutal and pragmatic. A boy, the future laborer and heir, might be given the last of the milk, the extra scrap of cloth for warmth, the more attentive care. Your cries might be met with a little less urgency. Your fever might be seen as God's will. This is not necessarily born of a lack of love, but a reflection of your perceived worth. In a world defined by a desperate struggle for survival, you are simply the less critical asset. Many infant girls who died of sickness or weakness were, in fact, victims of a subtle, fatal neglect. So you lie there in your first day of life. Your world is small, a universe of touch and sound and smell, but already the vast, complex, and unyielding structure of medieval society has closed in around you. It has assessed you, judged you, and found you wanting. You have committed no act, spoken no word, thought no thought, yet your existence has begun under a cloud of disappointment, as an economic burden or a dynastic failure. Your first sin, your original sin, was not disobedience in a mythical garden. It was the simple biological fact of your sex, revealed in a dark room full of women who knew, with the weary certainty of experience, that your life had just become immeasurably harder. The game was rigged, and your first breath was your first losing move. The first few years of your life, if you survive them, pass in a blur of simple sensations, sheltered by your mother's proximity. But the state we would call childhood, that precious, protected space for growth, learning, and play, is a luxury that does not exist for you. It is a concept from another world, another time. Your childhood is not a beginning. It is an apprenticeship. Before your hands are large enough to properly grasp the tools, they are being guided. Before you have mastered the complexities of language, you have already learned the simple, immutable vocabulary of obedience. Your future has been decided, and your entire upbringing is designed with a single, unyielding purpose: to shape you into the tool you were born to be. The moment you can walk steadily and follow simple instructions, your work begins. At the age of 5 or 6, while a boy of the same age might be allowed to run with a hoop or practice with a wooden sword, your world shrinks to the domestic sphere. There is no distinction between play and work. Your games are imitations of your mother's unending labor. You are given a small bundle of wool and a drop spindle. It is heavy and awkward in your small fingers. Your first attempts produce thread that is lumpy, thick, and thin, and snaps constantly. But you are made to persist, hour after hour, sitting by the hearth or in the doorway. The repetitive, hypnotic motion of the spindle becomes the rhythm of your days. You learn to card the greasy, burr-filled wool, its lanolin smell clinging to your hands and clothes. You learn to spin it into a consistent thread, not for amusement, but because the cloth that will cover your family and be used to pay taxes is woven from such threads. Your small, nimble fingers are a useful asset. Your duties multiply. You are tasked with scattering grain for the chickens, keeping a watchful eye on them as they scratch in the dirt. You are sent to gather firewood, your arms aching from carrying bundles of sticks almost as big as you are. You learn to haul water from the village well or stream, the wooden bucket heavy and sloshing, spilling cold water onto your thin tunic and bare legs. And perhaps your most important job is to care for your younger siblings. As soon as another baby arrives, you become a miniature mother. You rock the cradle, you wipe noses, you try to soothe cries while your mother is busy with the 1,000 other tasks required for survival. You are a child, raising a child. Your own youth, curtailed and sacrificed for the next generation. This life of labor is fueled by the barest of sustenance. The family meal is the clearest demonstration of your place in the household hierarchy. When the single daily meal is served, a stew of grains and whatever vegetables are in season, cooked in a single pot over the fire, you are served last. The best and largest portion goes to your father, the primary field laborer. Then come your brothers, the future of the family's workforce. Your mother takes her share, and you and any other sisters receive what is left. It is often thin, watery, and lacking any morsels of precious meat or fat that might have been in the pot. This is not cruelty for its own sake. It is brutal pragmatism. Your body is less essential than a man's. The result is chronic malnutrition. Your growth may be stunted, your body weakened, leaving you perpetually vulnerable to the diseases that sweep through the village with grim regularity: dysentery, ague, the flux. The constant, gnawing hunger is just a fact of your existence. While a boy might receive some rudimentary instruction from the village priest, or if he is a merchant's son, learn his letters and numbers, your mind is a field left deliberately fallow. You are not taught to read or write. Why would you need such skills? Your world is intended to be small, confined to the home and the village. Literacy is power. It is the key to understanding contracts, scripture, and the world of ideas. To keep you compliant, to ensure you accept your preordained role, this door is kept firmly shut. Your education is of a different, more insidious kind. It comes from the priest's sermons on a Sunday, the one break in the week's labor. You stand on the cold stone floor of the church and listen to stories of Eve, the first sinner, whose weakness brought ruin upon all of mankind. You learn that women are naturally more susceptible to temptation, more gullible, more talkative, and morally weaker than men. Your spiritual salvation lies not in inquiry or understanding, but in humility, silence, and above all, obedience. The Virgin Mary is held up as the ideal, pure, silent, and submissive to the will of God and her husband. She is a divine, unattainable standard. Eve is the reality you are warned against, becoming every single day. This education is reinforced at home. A sharp word from your mother or a swift blow from your father teaches you not to question, not to argue, not to assert yourself. Your will is something to be broken, not nurtured. You watch your mother. You see the way she defers to your father, the way she endures her endless toil without complaint, the way her life is a cycle of service, childbirth, and labor. She is your living textbook. She is your future. There is no alternative path presented, no other possibility imagined. And so you grow. Not in the joyful, exploratory way we think of growth, but like a sapling being deliberately bent and tied to grow in a certain shape. Your personality, your dreams, your desires, these are irrelevant luxuries. They are hammered out of you by work, hunger, and religious doctrine, replaced by the virtues of a good woman, diligence, quietness, and compliance. The world you inhabit is small, but the forces shaping you are immense and absolute. This period of your life does not end on a specific birthday or with any celebration. It ends when your body betrays you by showing the first signs of womanhood. The onset of menstruation is not a private milestone. It is a public signal. It means the tool has been fully forged. The investment of your meager upbringing is now ready to be cashed in. It is the sign to your father that it is time to open negotiations, to seek a husband, to finalize the transaction that has been your destiny since the moment of your birth. Your childhood of silent toil was merely the preface. The real business of your life, the transfer of your ownership from one man to another, is about to begin. The blood on your shift, the sign that you have become a woman, is a summons. It announces to the world, and most importantly, to your father, that you are no longer a child to be fed, but an asset to be moved. The concept of romantic love, of choosing a partner based on affection and compatibility, is a flight of fancy, a story told by traveling troubadours for the amusement of high-born ladies. In your world, marriage has nothing to do with love. It is a business arrangement, a cold and calculated contract designed to secure land, forge alliances, consolidate wealth, or simply to unburden one household of a mouth and add a pair of working hands to another. You are not the bride-to-be eagerly anticipating a new life. You are the subject of the negotiation, the living commodity at the heart of the deal. Your opinion is not requested. Your feelings are irrelevant. The decision is made entirely by your father, or if he is deceased, by your eldest brother or legal guardian. He is the master of your fate. You might be told of your impending marriage one evening as you serve the meal, the news delivered as a simple statement of fact, no more remarkable than an announcement that a field is to be ploughed tomorrow. The man you are to marry is a stranger. You may have seen him in the village, or at market, or you may never have laid eyes on him before. His age is not a primary concern for the negotiators. It is not uncommon for a girl of 12 or 13, barely past the threshold of puberty, to be wed to a man in his 30s, 40s, or even older, a widower with children who are nearly your own age. His character, his temperament, whether he is kind or cruel, gentle or brutish, is not part of the discussion. The only questions that matter are, what does he own? What can he offer? What is his social standing? The centerpiece of this entire negotiation is your dowry. This is the sum total of your value, quantified and made tangible. For your peasant family, as we have discussed, it is a crippling expense. Months, even years, of saving and scrimping have gone into assembling it. The family's best cow, a small plot of land painstakingly acquired, a chest of hand-woven linens spun by your own hands and your mother's since you were a child. These are the bargaining chips. The quality of your dowry dictates the quality of the husband your father can secure for you. A meager dowry means a poor match, an older man with little land, or a man of lower standing. A substantial dowry can elevate your family's status. The negotiations are tense, protracted affairs between the men of the two families, often held over ale. They haggle over every last chicken, every strip of cloth, every acre. You, the human being at the center of it all, are never present. You simply wait for the outcome. If you are a noblewoman, the stakes are far higher, and your personal agency is even less. Your marriage is a matter of statecraft. You are a piece on the great chessboard of medieval politics, to be moved and sacrificed for strategic advantage. Your hand in marriage could secure a fragile peace between two warring baronies, unite two powerful houses against a common enemy, or bring a much-needed influx of wealth and territory into your father's domain. Your future is decided in drafty castle chambers by men poring over maps and lineage charts. You could be promised, at the age of 6, to the infant son of a neighboring lord, your entire life, a waiting game for a political strategy to mature. You could be sent hundreds of miles away to a foreign court, to a man whose language you do not speak, whose customs are alien to you. The loneliness and terror of such a fate are immense, but they are subordinate to the needs of the dynasty. The terror of this moment is sharpened by the absolute finality of it. Once the agreement is made and the betrothal is sealed, often with a formal religious ceremony, it is almost impossible to break. To refuse to go through with the marriage would be to bring unimaginable shame and dishonor upon your family. It would mean financial ruin, as the dowry arrangements would collapse, and it would render you an outcast. Your father's authority is absolute, backed by the full power of the church and society. Disobedience is not an option. And what if you have no dowry? For a girl from an impoverished family, or an orphan, this is a catastrophic predicament. You are unmarriageable. No man will take on the burden of a wife who brings nothing with her. Your future is bleak. You might be forced into a life of drudgery as a servant in a richer household, where you are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse from the men of the family. You might enter a convent, not out of spiritual calling, but as the only respectable alternative to destitution. Or, in the grimmest of circumstances, you may be driven to the margins of society, selling your body in the alleyways of a growing town simply to eat. The absence of a dowry is the absence of a future. Finally, the day of the wedding arrives. You are dressed in the best clothes your family can provide. You walk to the church door, the designated place for the marriage ceremony. It is a public event, the entire village watching. As you stand before the priest, you are asked to give your consent. This is a cruel formality. With your father standing beside you and the entire weight of social expectation upon you, you utter the required word, yes. It is a word spoken under duress, a legal fiction that papers over the truth of your situation. With that single word, a profound legal transfer takes place. You cease to be the property of your father and become the property of your husband. The legal term for a wife is femme covert, a covered woman. Your legal identity is subsumed into his. You cannot own property in your own name. You cannot sign a contract. You cannot testify in court against him. He now has the legal right to your body, your labor, and any property you brought with you. He also has the legal right to chastise you, a chilling euphemism for physical discipline. The church may have counseled that he should not beat you to the point of death, but the line between acceptable correction and brutal violence is thin and entirely at his discretion. You leave the church, not as a partner in a new enterprise, but as a newly acquired possession. The celebration, the wedding feast, is for the families who have successfully concluded their business. For you, it is the beginning of a life of service to a stranger. That night, the consummation of the marriage is not a private, intimate moment. It is a public proof of purchase. The tradition of bedding ceremonies, where friends and family escort the couple to their bed, underscores the reality. This is not about you. It is about the legitimate transfer of property and the future production of heirs. You are a vessel, a field to be ploughed. Your worth now tied to your ability to produce children for a man you barely know. On the altar of marriage, your worth was calculated, and in the marriage bed, the deed was sealed. Your marriage has been sealed, your ownership transferred. Now, the singular, overwhelming purpose of your existence comes into sharp focus: procreation. From the moment you enter your husband's home, the expectation to conceive hangs in the air, a silent and constant pressure from your new family and the entire community. Your fertility is not a personal matter. It is a public concern. Your value as a wife, your very security within the household, is now directly linked to your ability to produce children, preferably male children. Each month that passes without a sign of pregnancy brings with it tightened lips, worried glances, and perhaps the murmur of prayers or the preparation of foul-tasting herbal concoctions meant to open your womb. But when you finally do conceive, the anxiety does not cease. It transforms into a different, more primal fear. You are now 9 months away from facing the single greatest danger in a woman's life, a trial by ordeal from which countless women do not return. You are facing childbirth. Pregnancy itself is a state of precariousness. Medical understanding is almost non-existent, mired in the theories of the four humours. Any ailment you suffer, from morning sickness to fatigue, is viewed through a lens of imbalance and superstition. Your diet is dictated by folk wisdomsome. Foods are thought to produce a strong male child, others a weak female. Your activities are curtailed, not for your comfort, but out of fear of harming the air you carry. As your body changes, it is not seen as a natural process, but as a vessel being prepared for its ultimate and potentially final function. When your labor begins, it is as if a curtain descends, separating you from the world of men. Your husband, the village priest, any male figure, they are banished. The birthing chamber, that same small, dark, and airless room where you yourself might have been born, becomes an exclusively female domain. The atmosphere is thick, with a mixture of pragmatic preparation and palpable dread. The windows are sealed, the keyhole is blocked, and any drafts are stopped up with rags. The prevailing belief is that a sudden gust of wind or a bad air could allow a demon to enter and harm you or the baby. The room is intentionally kept dark and warm, almost suffocating, to mimic the womb and coax the baby out. At the center of this world is the midwife. She is a woman of immense authority within this specific domain, yet her power is built on a fragile foundation. She has no formal training. She cannot read the ancient texts of Hippocrates or Galen. Her knowledge is a tangled inheritance of folklore, religious incantations, and observations from a lifetime of attending births. Her hands, which will soon be inside you, are unwashed, carrying the germs of the household, the soil, the animals. The concept of antiseptic practice is centuries away. Every touch, every internal examination, introduces the risk of the infection that will kill more women than the act of delivery itself. Puerperal fever or childbed fever. The process of labor is a brutal marathon. There are no analgesics, no epidurals to ease the pain. Your only relief is a sip of ale, a rag soaked in cool water, or the recitation of prayers to Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. You may be made to walk endlessly around the room, to climb up and down stairs, or to assume contorted positions, all based on the midwife's theories of how to reposition the baby. If the labor is long and difficult, desperation mounts. The midwife may resort to more aggressive measures. She may violently shake you, trying to jolt the baby into a better position. She might administer powerful and dangerously unpredictable herbal purgatives, hoping to stimulate contractions. The greatest terror is a complication. A baby in a breech position, or one whose shoulders are stuck, is often a death sentence for both mother and child. The midwife's tools are crude and horrifying. She might use hooks to try and turn the baby, a maneuver that could easily tear your uterus. In the most extreme cases, if the baby is believed to be dead, an embryotomy is performed. The child is dismembered in the womb, with sharp instruments to be removed piece by piece. A ghastly procedure performed solely to save your life. Caesarean sections are almost never attempted on living women. They are a post-mortem procedure, performed in a desperate, last-minute attempt to baptize the infant before it, too, perishes. And if you survive the delivery, if you push the child out into the world, the ordeal is not over. The third stage of labor, the delivery of the placenta, is fraught with danger. A retained placenta can lead to catastrophic hemorrhage or deadly infection. The midwife might pull on the umbilical cord, a dangerous practice that can invert the uterus, causing massive, uncontrollable bleeding. You can bleed to death on the straw pallet in a matter of minutes. Let us say you are one of the lucky ones. The baby is born, alive and crying. The placenta is delivered. The immediate crisis seems to be over. You are left exhausted, bleeding, and profoundly torn. The physical trauma is immense. Perineal tears are universal and are not sutured. You are simply left to heal, often resulting in incontinence, chronic pain, and fistulous agonizing internal passages between the rectum and vagina that leak waste, rendering you a social outcast due to the smell. Prolapsed organs are a common consequence of the strain. Your body may never fully recover from the violent transformation it has endured. And then comes the invisible enemy. In the days following the birth, you are kept in that same warm, sealed, unhygienic room. You are vulnerable. Every surface, every hand, every cloth teems with bacteria. The slightest fever is a sign of impending doom. It begins with a chill, then a raging temperature. This is the onset of childbed fever, the septic infection that races through your body. There is no cure. They will bleed you, pray over you, but the infection will consume you. Within a week of successfully bringing a new life into the world, you will be dead, another casualty of the blood and bone altar. This is the gamble you take with every pregnancy. Not once, but again and again and again. A woman might endure 10, 12, 15 pregnancies in her lifetime, each one a roll of the dice with her own life. To refuse your husband his conjugal rights is a sin and often an impossibility. To use any form of contraception is a grave sin in the eyes of the church. You are trapped in a biological cycle that is also your greatest existential threat. Each time you feel life stir within you, you also feel the cold shadow of the birthing chamber, a place where life and death are separated by the thinnest of threads, where every woman knows that the joy of a new baby is paid for with the very real currency of her own blood and her own life. For the vast, overwhelming majority of women in the Middle Ages, there is no castle, no courtly intrigue, no life of sequestered study in a convent. Your world is not made of stone walls and tapestries. It is made of mud, sweat, and soil. You are a peasant woman, a serf tied to the land by a web of obligation from which there is no escape. Your life is not a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is a circle, an unending loop dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the turning of the seasons. Your world is the space between your hovel, the field, the well, and the grave. Your day begins before the sun rises, in the cold, damp darkness of your family's hut. The dwelling itself is a testament to your station. It is a single-room structure, perhaps with a low loft for sleeping. The walls are wattle and dauber lattice of sticks packed with a mixture of clay, dung, and straw. The floor is packed earth, often shared with your family's most precious livestock, a chicken, a pig, or a calf huddled inside for warmth and for their own protection from thieves. The air is perpetually thick with the smell of smoke from the open central hearth, which fills the room with a stinging, choking haze before it finds a simple hole in the thatched roof. The stench of unwashed bodies, human and animal waste, and damp rot is a constant, inescapable companion. Your first task is to stoke the embers of the fire. You are the keeper of the flame, the one responsible for the household's single source of heat and cooked food. You prepare the day's first, and often only, substantial meal, a thin pottage of oats or peas, boiled in a single, soot-blackened pot that is never truly scrubbed clean. As we've established, you eat last and least. Then, your day of labor splits into two parallel streams of unrelenting work. Unlike the noblewoman, confined to her domestic sphere, you are expected to perform a double duty. First, there is the endless litany of women's work. You milk the family cow or goat, if you are lucky enough to have one. You churn the milk into butter or cheese, a back-breaking task. You feed the chickens and collect their precious eggs. You tend the small private garden, the kale garth, that grows next to your hovel, cultivating the vegetables that are the only variety in your monotonous diet of grain. You are responsible for fetching every drop of water for drinking, cooking, and washing. You bake the bread, not in a private oven, but at the lord of the manor's communal oven, for which you must pay a fee, usually a portion of your dough. You spin the thread, you weave the cloth, you mend the clothes. And all this is done while bearing, nursing, and raising your children. But your work does not end at the threshold of your home. When the seasons demand it, you are out in the fields, working alongside the men. At planting time, you walk behind your husband, dropping seeds into the furrows he has ploughed. At harvest, the entire family is mobilized in a frantic race against the weather. You work from sunrise to sunset, your back bent, cutting wheat with a sickle. The sharp stubble cuts at your ankles. The sun beats down on your uncovered head. Your hands become chapped, calloused, and cracked. Gleaning the practice of following the reapers and picking up the stray ears of grain they have misties, often left to the women and children. It is a vital but agonizingly slow task. The difference between having enough bread for the winter and going hungry. Your life is governed not by your own will, but by the dictates of the manorial lord. You are not free. As a serf, you are legally bound to the land. You cannot leave the manor without the lord's permission. You cannot marry someone from outside the manor without his consent, and often the payment of a fine, the murchit. When your father dies, your family must pay the heriot, an inheritance tax, often the best animal your family owns, just for the right to continue working the same land. The Lord's reeve can call upon you for boon work, forcing you to neglect your own vital tasks to work unpaid on the Lord's personal lands, his demesne. Your time, your labor, and your body are not truly your own. Health and hygiene are unimaginable concepts. The water from the village well is often contaminated with animal and human waste, leading to chronic stomach ailments and outbreaks of dysentery. Bathing is a rarity. Soap is a luxury you cannot afford. You wear the same woolen tunic day after day, a garment that is stiff with dirt and sweat and crawling with fleas and lice. The rubbish and waste from your hut are simply thrown out the door, accumulating in a stinking pile that attracts flies and vermin. Sickness is a constant threat, and remedies are a desperate mix of herbal lore and superstition. A festering wound is packed with cobwebs and dung. A fever is treated by bleeding. The simplest injury, a cut from a sickle or a splinter, can lead to a fatal infection. Your life expectancy is brutally short. If you survive the perils of childbirth, you might live to see your late 30s or early 40s. your body worn out and broken by ceaseless labor and chronic malnutrition. There is no respite, no holiday in the modern sense. Even on the numerous religious feast days, you are expected to attend church, and the rest of the day is often filled with the domestic chores that never cease. There is a raw, brutal physicality to your existence. Every single day is a struggle for the calories needed to survive until the next. Joy is found in small, fleeting moments, a successful birth, a harvest that is slightly more bountiful than the last, a child surviving a fever. But these moments are specks of light in an overwhelming darkness, a brief pause in the unending, exhausting cycle of labor that defines your world from the cradle to your early, unmarked grave. Let us now leave the mud and wattle hovel and travel to a world of stone and tapestry, a world that seems, from a distance, to be one of comfort, luxury, and privilege. We enter the cold, imposing walls of a castle. You are a noblewoman, the daughter or wife of a lord, a baron, or a knight. You do not toil in the fields under a brutal sun. Your hands are soft, uncalloused. Your belly is full. You wear gowns of fine wool and linen, perhaps even silk, in rich, deep colors. But to equate this material comfort with freedom or happiness would be a grave misunderstanding. You have simply exchanged one form of bondage for another. Your prison is not made of legal obligation to the land. It is made of stone walls, rigid etiquette, and suffocating expectation. You are a canary in a gilded cage, and the higher the walls of your castle, the less freedom you possess. Your primary function, the reason for your very existence within this noble structure, is identical to that of your peasant counterpart, but with stakes that ripple through the political landscape. You must produce a male heir. From the moment of your marriage, a womb watch begins. The entire household, from your powerful husband and his ambitious kin to the lowliest serving girl, is invested in the state of your body. Your monthly courses are a matter of public anxiety. A missed period is a cause for guarded optimism, whispered speculation, and intensified prayer. When your pregnancy is confirmed, you are treated like a fragile, precious vessel. But this care is not for you as an individual. It is for the dynastic cargo you carry. The pressure is immense, a crushing psychological weight. If you produce a daughter, as we've seen, the disappointment is palpable. It is a failure, your failure, and it will be met with thin smiles and a renewed, urgent expectation to try again. If you produce a son, the castle will erupt in celebration. Bells will ring, a feast will be declared, and your husband will be triumphant. You will have done your duty. For a brief time, you will be lauded and valued. Your status is secured, but only temporarily. The son you bore must now survive the perilous medieval childhood, and you will be expected to produce another, a spare for the heir, to guard against the whims of disease and accident. If you prove to be barren, or if you only bear daughters, your position is catastrophically insecure. Your husband may seek an annulment from the church, arguing that the marriage was never truly consummated in God's eyes because it failed in its primary purpose. You could be cast aside, repudiated, and sent in disgrace to a remote convent, your place taken by a new, hopefully more fertile, wife. Your entire life is lived under scrutiny. Your virtue is your most valuable and most fragile possession. While a peasant man might care if his wife is unfaithful, a nobleman's concern is one of obsession, for it strikes at the very heart of his legacy. An affair, or even the merest rumor of one, calls into question the legitimacy of his children. An heir with doubtful paternity could throw the entire succession into chaos, potentially leading to civil war. Therefore, your every move is monitored. You are never truly alone. Ladies in waiting, chosen by your husband or his family, are your constant companions. They are your friends, yes, but they are also your minders, their watchful eyes, a constant reminder that your fidelity is a matter of state security. A public accusation of adultery is a death sentence for your reputation and, quite possibly, your life. The legal standards are savagely imbalanced. A nobleman could keep mistresses with little social consequence, but for you, the punishment is swift and brutal. Depending on the law of the land and the temper of your husband, you could be publicly shamed, have your hair shorn, and be flogged. You could be divorced and stripped of all your titles and lands. You could be locked away for the rest of your life in a convent or even the dungeons of your own castle. In some places and times, the law permitted your husband to kill you and your lover with impunity if he discovered you in the act. Your body is not your own, it is the property of your husband's bloodline. Life within the castle is a routine of monotonous, structured boredom. While the lord is away at war, on a hunt, or at court, the lady of the castle is expected to manage the vast and complex household. This is a significant responsibility, overseeing supplies, managing servants, keeping accounts. It requires intelligence and competence. But this is not a position of true power. It is a deputized authority, always subject to the master's return and his ultimate veto. Your days are spent in feminine pursuits, designed to keep you occupied and out of trouble. You perform fine needlework and embroidery, creating vast tapestries that depict the heroic masculine deeds of your family's men. You might play chess, sing, or play a musical instrument like the lute. You might listen to a chaplain read from religious texts. It is a life of enforced leisure, a state of perpetual waiting, waiting for your husband, waiting to get pregnant, waiting to give birth. The castle itself, a symbol of power from the outside, is often a dark, cold, and uncomfortable place to live. The great halls are drafty and smoky. The stone walls weep with moisture. Privacy is a concept that barely exists, with servants and family members constantly moving through even private chambers. The romance of chivalry, of knights dedicating their deeds to their ladies, is largely a literary invention. While you might be the queen of the tournament, your honor fought over by knights in a symbolic display, the reality of your relationship with your husband is often one of a distant, formal partnership at best, and a fearful, subservient one at worst. You are a beautiful, well-fed, and finely dressed prisoner, trapped in a gilded cage built of honor, duty, and the crushing weight of a name you did not choose, but are required to perpetuate. Let us now move away from the rigid, predictable world of the manor and the castle, and into the narrow, crowded, and chaotic streets of a medieval town. The city air, as a German saying went, makes one free. For a man, escaping from the bondage of serfdom to a town and remaining there for a year and a day could grant him his freedom. For you, as a woman, this promise of freedom is far more ambiguous and conditional. The city offers possibilities that do not exist in the countryside, but it also presents a new and bewildering array of dangers. The free air of the town is thick with the stench of coal smoke, rotting garbage, and a desperate, competitive humanity. Here, survival is a frantic scramble, and you exist in the precarious spaces between organized labor and the squalor of the gutter. If you arrive in the city as a young, unmarried woman, perhaps fleeing rural poverty or seeking a life not tied to the soil, your options are starkly limited. The beating heart of the urban economy is the guild system. These powerful associations of craftsmen, bakers, weavers, carpenters, goldsmiths control the production and sale of nearly all goods. They are male-dominated brotherhoods, and their rules are explicitly designed to protect their members from competition. For you, the doors to most guilds are firmly shut. You cannot become an apprentice to a master carpenter. You cannot open your own silversmith shop. Your economic independence is throttled before it can even begin. There are, however, cracks in this patriarchal wall. Some guilds, particularly those related to textiles, brewing, and food production fields, traditionally seen as women's work, might allow you a limited role. If you are the widow of a master craftsman, You might be permitted to carry on your husband's trade, but often with restrictions. You may not be allowed to hire apprentices or journeymen, effectively guaranteeing that your business will wither and die with you. This privilege is not a recognition of your rights, but a temporary measure of pity, a way for the guild to ensure the man's family is not left destitute. For most women, the main path to economic participation is to be an unmarried femme soul, working in low-paying, unregulated trades. You could become a spinner, selling your thread to male weavers. You could be a huckster or a regrater, buying goods like eggs or vegetables from peasants at the city gates and reselling them in the market for a tiny profit. The most common occupation is domestic service. You might become a servant in the household of a wealthy merchant, a life of endless drudgery, long hours, low pay, and extreme vulnerability. As a servant girl, you are often seen as fair game by the master of the house, his sons, or male apprentices. A complaint from you would mean instant dismissal and ruin, while your accuser would face no consequences. An unwanted pregnancy would see you cast out into the streets with nowhere to go. The urban environment itself is a relentless assault on the senses and the body. You live in a cramped, multi-storied, timber-framed house, leaning precariously over a narrow, unpaved street. The upper floors jut out over the lower ones, nearly touching the house across the way and blocking out the sunlight. There is no sanitation system. Household waste, from chamber pots to vegetable peelings, is simply tossed out of the window into the central gutter of the street below, announced by a perfunctory shout of "Garde-l'eau," from the French garde-l'eau, watch out for the water. The streets are a foul-smelling morass of mud, animal dung, and human effluent. Pigs roam freely, consuming some of the filth, but adding their own. The rivers that run through the towns, the primary source of drinking water for many, are open sewers, choked with waste from tanneries, butcher shops, and households. This staggering lack of hygiene creates a perfect breeding ground for disease. Sickness spreads through the dense population like wildfire. Fleas, lice, and rats are everywhere. Contaminated water and food lead to constant outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. Leprosy is a visible and terrifying presence, its victims forced to ring bells to warn others of their approach. And in this environment, you, often with a body already weakened by poor nutrition, are particularly susceptible. You are living in a petri dish of infection. For the woman who cannot secure a place as a wife, a servant, or a low-level trader, the final, desperate option remains. The cities, with their transient populations of men soldiers, merchants, apprentice, create a demand for prostitution. This is not a choice, but a consequence of a system that denies you other means of survival. The life of a prostitute is brutal and short. While some towns might attempt to regulate the trade, confining it to certain districts, the stews, and forcing women to wear identifying clothing, this offers little real protection. You are subject to constant violence from clients and pimps. You are ostracized by respectable society and condemned from the pulpit by the church. You are at the highest risk of contracting venereal diseases like syphilis, which would lead to a slow, painful, and disfiguring death. You are trapped, a pariah in the very city that promised freedom. Even if you are a respectable wife of a merchant, your life is still one of confinement. Your place is in the home, which is often located directly above or behind the shop. While your husband engages in the public life of the city, the business, the politics, the guild meetings, your world is the private one of managing the household and raising children. The city offers more distractions, the thrill of the market, the spectacle of a traveling fair, but your access to this public life is limited and always chaperoned. The city's shadows are long, and they hide not just filth and disease, but a deep-seated vulnerability for any woman trying to navigate its treacherous currents alone. The freedom of the city air is a poisoned chalice. In a world that offers you so few choices, One path appears to stand apart from the cycle of marriage, childbirth, and toil. It is the life of the Spirit, a life dedicated to God. The convent. For centuries, the cloister has been portrayed as a sanctuary, a safe haven for women seeking to escape the brutal realities of the secular world. It was a place for the pious, the intellectual, and the unwanted. But to see the convent as a simple escape is to misunderstand its complex nature. For some, it was a refuge. For others, it was an elegantly furnished prison, where the chains of worldly duty were merely exchanged for the equally binding fetters of divine obedience. Your entry into this life was often not a choice at all. Consider the ways you might find yourself at the convent gates. You could be a young noblewoman whose marriage prospects are deemed insufficient for a grand political alliance. Rather than waste you on a lesser lord, your family might decide that a marriage to Christ is a more prestigious and cost-effective solution. The dowry paid to the convent to secure your entry is often significantly less than what would be required for a worldly marriage. Or perhaps you are one of several daughters in a family. With the cost of multiple dowries being prohibitively expensive, dedicating one or more daughters to the church is a pragmatic financial decision. You are a surplus daughter, and the convent is your designated repository. Alternatively, you could be a widow. After your husband's death, your male relatives, your sons, or your late husband's brothers may wish to gain control of the lands you hold as a dowager. Coercing you into a convent is a convenient way to neutralize your legal claims and absorb your property back into the family's control. Or you could be brought to the gates as a very young child, an oblate, given to the monastery by your parents as a living offering to God, perhaps in thanks for the birth of a longed-for son, or to atone for some sin. Your life's path is decided for you before you can even form a memory of the outside world. True spiritual calling, a genuine desire for a life of prayer and contemplation, was certainly a path for some. For a woman with intellectual curiosity, the convent offered a rare opportunity for literacy and learning, a world away from the enforced ignorance of most women's lives. But even for those who entered willingly, the reality of the cloister could be a stark and difficult adjustment. The moment you take your final vows, a profound separation occurs. You undergo a symbolic death. The ceremony itself mimics a funeral. You lie prostrate on the floor, covered with a pall, while the rites for the dead are read over you. When you rise, you are no longer the person you were. You have a new name. Your hair, a symbol of vanity and worldly femininity, is shorn. You are stripped of your fine clothes and dressed in a simple, rough habit. You have renounced the world, your family, your property, and your own will. Your life is no longer your own. It belongs to God and, more tangibly, to the abbess and the strict rule of your order. Life within the convent walls is a relentless, regimented routine. The day is structured around the liturgy of the hours, a cycle of 8 services of prayer and worship, beginning with matins long before dawn and ending with compline after sunset. The canonical hours are the framework upon which your entire existence is built. In between these periods of prayer, you are expected to work. Ora et labora, pray and work, is the Benedictine motto. This work could involve tending the convent's gardens, raising medicinal herbs, beekeeping, or spinning and weaving. The most significant work for many nuns was taking place in the scriptorium. Here, in the quiet, focused atmosphere, you would copy and illuminate manuscripts, painstakingly preserving religious texts and classical knowledge. It was a vital cultural role, but it was still slow, exacting labor that confined you for hours on a hard bench. Silence is a perpetual rule. Unnecessary speech is a sin, a distraction from contemplation. Meals are taken in a refectory without conversation, listening only to a sister reading from a sacred text. Your diet is simple and frugal, and frequent fasts are an integral part of the spiritual discipline, a way to mortify the flesh and focus the mind. You sleep not in a private room, but in a communal dormitory, your personal space reduced to a simple straw mattress. The cold of the stone walls is a constant presence, seeping into your bones. The convent is a microcosm of the secular world, with its own rigid hierarchies and internal politics. The abbess, often a woman from a powerful noble family, wields absolute authority. Her favor can make your life tolerable. Her displeasure can make it a misery. Feuds and jealousies can fester in the close, confined atmosphere, just as they do in any royal court. While the ideal was a community of spiritual sisters, the reality could be far from it. Furthermore, not all convents were created equal. A wealthy, well-endowed abbey with royal patronage could be a center of learning and relative comfort, but a poor, rural nunnery might struggle constantly for basic subsistence, its members living in conditions of cold and hunger not far removed from their peasant neighbors. There were also instances of moral laxity and corruption. Despite the high walls, the secular world could not always be kept out. Powerful men could interfere in convent affairs, installing their relatives as abbesses. In some cases, vows of chastity were broken, and scandals would erupt, bringing shame and harsh crackdowns from the bishop. For the woman who was forced into this life against her will, the convent was nothing short of a prison. Every ringing of the bell for prayers was a reminder of a life you did not choose. The chants were monotonous, the work was drudgery, the silence was suffocating. There was no hope of release. An oath sworn before God was eternal. To leave the convent was apostasy, a sin that would condemn you to excommunication in this life and damnation in the next. You were entombed alive, walled off from the world, left to count the passing of the years by the changing of the liturgical seasons, a silent witness to a life that could have been forever locked behind stone and prayer. In any society, the law is the ultimate framework that defines rights, responsibilities, and power. It is the theoretical bedrock of justice. But for you, as a woman in the Middle Ages, the law is not a shield that protects you. It is a cudgel that subdues you. It is a cold, dispassionate system, authored by men, interpreted by men, and enforced by men, which codifies your inferiority at every turn. To stand before a medieval court is to understand the full weight of your systemic powerlessness. Your voice is a whisper in a chamber designed to ignore you. Your rights are a phantom concept in a world that sees you not as a citizen, but as a possession. The fundamental principle that underpins your legal status is that of coverture. As we have seen, from the moment you are married, your legal existence is absorbed by, or covered by, that of your husband. You become a femme covert, a legal non-entity. This is not a metaphor. It is a practical, legal reality with devastating consequences. You cannot own land or property independently. The dowry you brought to the marriage, any inheritance you might receive, any wages you might earn, it all legally belongs to your husband. He has the absolute right to manage it, sell it, or squander it, and you have no legal recourse. You cannot enter into a contract on your own behalf. You cannot sue someone who has wronged you, nor can you be sued directly. Any legal action must be brought by or against your husband. He is your legal representative, your master, your voice in the public sphere. This legal subjugation extends to your physical person. Your husband's right to chastise you is enshrined in law. He is your governor, and physical correction is seen as a legitimate tool for ensuring your obedience and good behavior. The famous rule of thumb, while possibly a later folk saying, captures the essence of the legal limit. The stick he used to beat you should be no thicker than his thumb. The law did not concern itself with the bruises, the fear, or the daily terror of living with a violent man. It only intervened at the point of outrageous, life-threatening battery, and even then, community and church pressure would favor reconciliation and private penance over public legal action. Your home, far from being a sanctuary, is a space where the law sanctions violence against you. When you are the victim of a crime, especially a sexual one, the legal system conspires against you in a labyrinth of suspicion and disbelief. If you are raped, the burden of proof is almost entirely on you. The law demands that you raise the hue and cry immediate, that is, you must run, disheveled and screaming, to the nearest group of men to show your injuries and declare the assault. Any delay is seen as evidence of consent. You would have to display torn clothing and visible bruises as proof of your struggle. A court would then investigate your own moral character. Were you a virtuous and reputable woman? Were you in a place you ought not to have been? Was your dress considered provocative? The questioning puts you, the victim, on trial. A man of good standing's simple denial often carried more weight than all your evidence. If the man was your lord, a master, or a social superior, the very idea of bringing a case was almost unthinkable. And if you became pregnant as a result of the assault, the law in many places considered this proof of your own sinful pleasure in the act, nullifying the crime entirely. The law also invented specific crimes that could only be committed by women, offenses that were rooted in a deep-seated fear of female speech and social disruption. The crime of being a common scold is a prime example. If you were deemed too argumentative, too outspoken, a woman who gossiped or publicly challenged your husband or other authorities, you could be formally charged. The punishment was one of public humiliation, designed to silence you and serve as a warning to others. The scold's bridle, or brank, was a terrifying iron mask and muzzle. A metal plate, often spiked, was forced into your mouth to press down on your tongue, making speech impossible. You would then be paraded through the town, led by a chain, to be jeered at and pelted with refuse by your neighbors. Other punishments included the cucking stool, a chair to which you were strapped and then dunked repeatedly into the local river or pond, a form of public waterboarding as legal sentence. In cases of adultery, the double standard was not just a social norm, it was written into the law. A husband's infidelity with an unmarried woman was a minor sin. Your infidelity was a crime against property and bloodline. As we've noted, your husband might have the right to kill you. More commonly, a man who committed adultery might have to pay a fine to the church. You, the woman, would face public shaming, forced to walk barefoot through the parish, wrapped in a white sheet, holding a candle, to confess your sin before the entire congregation. Your transgression was a public spectacle. His was a private matter. Even in death, the law discriminated. Inheritance laws, such as primogeniture, heavily favored the eldest son. Daughters could only inherit land in the absence of any male heirs. And a widow's claim on her husband's estate, her dower, was often a life interest in only 1/3 of his property. This right was precarious and could be challenged by her own sons or her late husband's relatives. If you ever found yourself in the terrifying position of being accused of a crime, you might be subjected to a trial by ordeal. This was a judicial practice in the early Middle Ages, where your guilt or innocence was left in the hands of God. You might be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar for a set distance. Your hand would then be bandaged and inspected 3 days later. If it was healing cleanly, God had declared you innocent. If it was festering, you were guilty. Or there was the trial by water. You would be bound and thrown into a body of water that had been blessed. If you sank, you were innocent, pulled out before you drowned. If you floated, the pure water had rejected your guilty body, and you were condemned. For a woman, already deemed morally weak and susceptible to evil, facing such a trial was to face a game that was profoundly rigged against you. The entire legal system was a reflection of the society that built it, one that viewed you as fundamentally untrustworthy, inherently inferior, and in constant need of male control. Your body, the physical reality in which you live every moment of your life, is a source of constant mystery, shame, and danger. In the worldview of medieval medicine, a system inherited from the ancient Greek physicians Galen and Hippocrates. You are not simply a different sex. You are a fundamentally flawed and imperfect version of a man. The male body is the norm, the ideal. It is hot and dry, the perfect balance for a rational, active being. Your body, by contrast, is cold and wet. This humoral imbalance is not just a physiological curiosity. It is the source of all your perceived weaknesses, your emotional volatility, your physical frailty, and your intellectual inferiority. You are, by your very nature, a walking, breathing medical deficiency. This worldview colors the understanding of every aspect of your biology. Your reproductive organs are believed to be an inverted, and therefore inferior, version of the male's, located inside the body because you lack the essential vital heat to push them outwards. Your womb is not seen as a nurturing organ but as a cold, dank, and dangerously unstable one. It is porous and spongy, prone to collecting an excess of corrupt humors. Your menstruation is a deeply unsettling and mysterious process to the male medical establishment. It is seen as a necessary monthly evacuation of these excess, venomous fluids that have built up in your defective body. This monthly purgation is why you are seen as inherently unclean, both physically and spiritually. During your period, you are a source of pollution. It is believed your very gaze could dim a mirror, spoil wine, or cause crops to fail. You are, for a time each month, a walking source of contagion. This concept of a corrupt and wandering womb gives rise to the most infamous and enduring of female-specific diagnoses: hysteria. The very word comes from the Greek hystera, meaning uterus. The male physicians and philosophers of the age believed that your womb was not a fixed organ. They thought it was a free-floating entity within your body, almost like a separate animal with its own desires. When it became dry or light, often believed to be caused by a lack of sexual intercourse, it would wander throughout your body in search of moisture, pressing against other organs and causing a bewildering array of symptoms. If the womb rose and pressed against your diaphragm and heart, it would cause shortness of breath, anxiety, and a feeling of suffocation. If it pressed against your head, it would cause dizziness, seizures, and mania. Ailments as diverse as fainting spells, muscle spasms, loss of appetite, irritability, and even a simple feeling of sadness could all be blamed on your wandering womb. The cures for this phantom condition were as invasive as the diagnosis was absurd. The goal was either to coax the womb back to its proper place or to weigh it down with moisture. The first approach involved the use of scents. Since the womb was thought to be repelled by foul smells and attracted to pleasant ones, a physician might hold pungent, foul-smelling substances like burnt feathers or pitch under your nose, while simultaneously applying sweet-smelling perfumes and unguents to your thighs and vulva, hoping to lure the organ downwards. The other approach was to rehydrate the womb. This often meant prescribing regular sexual intercourse, reinforcing the idea that a woman's health was dependent on a man. For a virgin or a widow diagnosed with hysteria, the only prescription was marriage. For a married woman, it might be an instruction to her husband to increase the frequency of his attentions. In this medical framework, your health is not in your own hands. It is dependent on fulfilling a biological and social function determined by men. Your suffering is not taken seriously as a complex ailment, but is reduced to a single, crudely mechanical malfunction of your uniquely female anatomy. Common ailments that afflicted you were filtered through this same lens of humoral imbalance. A fever, a cough, a persistent headache would be attributed to an excess of some humor, most likely cold and wet phlegm. The standard treatment for almost any serious illness was bloodletting. The physician, or more likely a barber surgeon, would open a vein and drain a quantity of your blood, believing this would rebalance your humors. For a body already weakened by malnutrition and illness, this practice was often debilitating, if not fatal. Other treatments included powerful herbal emetics and laxatives to purge your body of corrupt fluids, a violent and dehydrating ordeal that often worsened your condition. Your own knowledge of your body, the folk wisdom passed down from your mother and grandmother about herbal remedies for menstrual pain or teas to ease morning sickness, was viewed with suspicion by the male, university-trained, medical elite. These were old wives' tales. While often more practical and gentle than the physician's aggressive purges and bleeding, this female-centric knowledge would, over time, become increasingly associated with something darker: witchcraft. The woman who knew how to soothe a colic baby or ease the pains of labor was walking a fine line. Her cures, derived from experience and nature, could easily be reinterpreted by a suspicious priest or neighbor as a sign of a pact with unseen forces. In essence, you are imprisoned within a body you are not allowed to understand, a body that has been defined for you by a medical tradition that sees it as inherently diseased, unstable, and unclean. Your pain is not validated. It is diagnosed as a moral or biological failing. Your very anatomy is used as proof of your inferiority. Every biological process that makes you a woman, menstruation, pregnancy, menopause, is pathologized, treated as a deviation from the male standard, and shrouded in a fog of fear, shame, and dangerous misinformation. History remembers the Crusades as a grand, epic saga of faith, ambition, and warfare. It is a story dominated by armored knights, pious kings, and zealous popes, all marching under the banner of the cross to reclaim the Holy Land. But this hyper-masculine narrative conceals a parallel journey, one that is almost entirely absent from the chronicles and epic poems. It is the story of the women who also took to the road, a vast, uncounted multitude whose presence was both essential to the expedition and scorned by its leaders. As a woman on the path of a crusade, you are not a warrior or a strategist. You are part of the baggage train of humanity, your own spiritual pilgrimage, inextricably bound to a world of profound suffering, exploitation, and anonymity. You are likely one of two kinds of women on this journey. Perhaps you are a noble woman, the wife or daughter of a great lord, accompanying him on his sacred quest. Your journey, while still arduous, is one of relative privilege. You travel on horseback or in a wagon, sheltered from the worst of the elements. You have servants, guards, and a private tent. Your stated purpose is to provide a bastion of moral piety and domestic stability in the military camp, to inspire your husband through your virtuous presence. However, your very existence on the campaign is a source of controversy. The church leaders and militant clergy who preach the crusade see women as a distraction, a source of temptation and sin that weakens the spiritual resolve of the fighting men. You are a reminder of the earthly comforts they are supposed to have forsaken for God's work. Your presence is tolerated only because of your rank, but you are far more likely to be a part of the other, much larger group, the unrecorded masses of non-combatant women who form the lifeblood of the crusading army. You are a pilgrim, swept up in the religious fervor of the age, genuinely believing that the perilous journey to Jerusalem will grant you remission for your sins. Or perhaps you have no other choice. You might be the wife of a simple soldier or a poor knight, forced to follow your husband because you have no means to support yourself if you are left behind. Most commonly, you are a functional necessity. You are a laundress, a cook, a mender of clothes, a nurse. You perform the thankless, endless labor that keeps the army from disintegrating into a heap of filth and disease. Your journey is on foot. You walk hundreds, then thousands of miles across a Europe you have never seen. You traverse treacherous mountain passes, ford rushing rivers, and cross scorching plains. You own nothing but the clothes on your back and what few possessions you can carry. The fine-laced rhetoric of the preachers about a holy cause feels very distant as you trudge through mud, your thin shoes worn through, your feet bleeding and blistered. You are not part of the disciplined military column. You are part of the vulgus, the disorganized, sprawling crowd of the poor that trails behind the army like a river of human debris. Food is a constant, gnawing anxiety. The army's supply lines are tenuous at best and non-existent at worst. The fighting men are fed first. You are left to scavenge, to beg, or to purchase scraps from cynical camp followers at inflated prices. When the army passes through hostile or simply exhausted territory, famine sets in. You see men, women, and children around you weaken, their faces hollowing out, their steps slowing. You witness desperation turn to brutality, with fights breaking out over a stale crust of bread. Disease, the ever-present companion of any medieval army, moves through your ranks with terrifying speed. Dysentery, typhoid, and scurvy fell more crusaders than any Saracen sword. As a woman, you are often the primary caregiver, tending to your sick husband or children, watching them suffer and die in a makeshift tent far from home. In doing so, you expose yourself to the very contagion that is decimating your community. The danger of violence is your constant shadow. When the army is on the move, you are vulnerable to attacks from local populations who see the crusade not as a holy mission, but as an invading horde of ravenous locusts. When the army besieges a city, you are encamped outside the walls, exposed to enemy raids. The greatest threat, however, often comes from within your own camp. The crusading army is a volatile collection of armed men, far from the social restraints of their homes. As a poor, unattached woman, you are seen as prey. Assault and rape are a common, unreported reality of camp life, a horror for which there is no justice or recourse. And then, there are the women who are there to explicitly service the men's desires. Prostitutes, or women forced into the role by poverty, form a massive, officially condemned, but unofficially tolerated part of the camp. The church rails against their presence, blaming them for God's displeasure when the army suffers a defeat. Periodically, a zealous leader will attempt to purge the camp, flogging these women and driving them out into the wilderness to fend for themselves. But they always return, because the demand for their presence is as constant as the army's need for food. They are the ultimate scapegoats, the repository for both the sins and the blame of the holy warriors. If you are captured in a skirmish or after a disastrous battle, your fate is grim. You are a prize of war. You will be sold in the slave markets of Damascus or Cairo, your life of hardship in Christendom exchanged for a life of chattel slavery in a foreign land. Your name will be forgotten. Your story will end, unrecorded, in a place you never imagined. You, who walked 1,000 miles for your faith, are erased from its history. You were the water carrier, the cook, the healer, the sinner, the slave. You were the essential, invisible scaffold upon which the grand, violent enterprise of the Crusades was built. And once it was over, you were dismantled and forgotten. Let us now turn our ship's prow northward, to the cold shores and mist-shrouded fjords of Scandinavia. The popular imagination, fueled by sagas and modern media, has painted the Viking Age woman as a figure of unique power and autonomy. We picture the shield maiden, the Valkyrie on earth, a warrior standing shoulder to shoulder with her male counterpart, her hair braided, an axe in her hand. We think of the powerful matriarch, ruling the longhouse with an iron will while her husband is away raiding. There are kernels of truth in these romantic images, but they obscure a much more complex and often far more brutal reality. For every formidable shield-bearing matriarch, there were countless women whose lives were ones of quiet domestic toil, or worse, the abject misery of slavery. The land of the sea-wolves offered its own distinct set of trials. If you are a free-born woman, the wife of a Jarl or a Kala chieftain, or a free farmer, you do possess a degree of authority and respect that might seem unusual compared to your southern European contemporaries. The law codes of the time reflect this. You can inherit property. You have the right to claim a divorce if you are mistreated or if your husband is unable to provide for the family. And when your husband and the other men of the longhouse embark on their long, dangerous sea voyages for raiding or for trade, you become the absolute master of the homestead. This role is symbolized by the keys you wear at your belt. You are the keeper of the keys, and they unlock the household's wealth, the locked chests of food, treasure, and supplies. You manage the farm, oversee the servants and slaves, direct the planting and the harvest, and are responsible for the production of essential goods like cloth. Your home is not just a dwelling, it is a center of production, and you are its chief executive. You are expected to be shrewd, capable, and tough. The sagas are filled with tales of formidable women who are clever counselors to their husbands, fierce protectors of their family's honor, and relentless in pursuing vengeance for slain kin. This is the reality behind the myth of the powerful Viking woman. Not a life of battle, but a life of immense domestic responsibility and authority. However, this authority is conditional and exists within a fiercely patriarchal society. Your marriage is still arranged for the benefit of the family. Your primary value is still tied to your fertility and your ability to produce sons to carry on the family line. And the society you manage is built upon a foundation of honor and violence. A feud can erupt from a simple insult, leading to a bloody cycle of revenge killings that could claim your husband, your sons, or your brothers, shattering the stability of your world in an instant. Your role is often to whet the anger of your menfolk, to incite them to vengeance, to uphold the family's honor, a dangerous and often tragic position. Now, let us descend from the relative security of the longhouse floor to the coldest, darkest corner of this society. This is the world of the thrall. You are a female slave. You are not a person in the eyes of the law. You are property, no different from a cow or a chest of silver. Your life before this point has been violently erased. You were captured in a raid. Perhaps you were an Anglo-Saxon woman from a coastal village in England, a Celtic woman snatched from a monastery in Ireland, or a Slavic woman from a trading post along a Russian river. Your village was burned, your family was killed, and you were dragged in chains onto a longship, enduring a terrifying voyage to this cold, new land. Your existence is one of endless, soul-crushing labor with no hope of reprieve. You do the most grueling work on the farm, grinding grain for hours with a heavy quernstone until your back and arms scream, mucking out the animal stalls, carrying heavy loads of wood and water, and serving the freeborn family in the longhouse. You sleep on the floor in the coldest part of the house, perhaps on a heap of straw. Your clothing is a single, coarse, undyed tunic, your food the leftover scraps from the master's table. You have no bodily autonomy. This is the grimmest part of your reality. You are at the absolute mercy of your master, his sons, and any male guests in the household. Rape is not a crime when it is committed against a thrall. It is simply the master exercising his property rights. Any child you bear as a result of this abuse is born a thrall, another piece of property for the master. You may be forced to bear children for him to increase his stock of slaves. You have no right to marry, no right to form a family. Your emotional attachments are meaningless to your owners. You can be sold at any time, separated from any children you may have borne, traded away for a new sword or a few pieces of silver. The sagas, for all their focus on heroes and honor, are chillingly casual in their depiction of the abuse of thralls. Your suffering is a backdrop, an accepted part of the social fabric, and your fate can be even more terrible than a life of toil. Archaeological finds of ship burials, where a great chieftain is buried in his longship, sometimes reveal the skeletons of sacrificed women alongside him. These are believed to be female thralls, killed to serve their master in the afterlife. One of the most harrowing accounts from an Arab diplomat, Ibn Fadlan, describes the funeral of a Rus chieftain. A thrall girl volunteers to be sacrificed and join her master. She is forced to drink large amounts of alcohol, ritually raped by the chieftain's closest companions, and then strangled and stabbed to death on the funeral pyre by an elder woman known as the Angel of Death. This is the dark, foundational secret beneath the veneer of Viking strength and the romantic image of the Shield Maiden. The prosperity of the Longhouse, the freedom of the Viking farmer's wife to manage her estate, all of it, was built upon the broken backs and stolen lives of people like you. The myth of the Valkyrie is a powerful one, but the historical reality for countless women in the Viking world was that of the thrall, a life not of glory and freedom, but of absolute subjugation, unending violence, and utter despair. In the middle of the 14th century, a catastrophe of unimaginable scale descends upon your world. It arrives silently at first, on merchant ships from the east, carried by the fleas on the backs of rats. It is a pestilence so swift, so lethal, and so terrifying that it feels like the end of the world itself. They will call it the Great Mortality. We know it as the Black Death. This plague does not distinguish between rich and poor, man or woman, noble or peasant. But for you, as a woman, this unprecedented disaster forces you into a uniquely dangerous and tragic dual role. You become the primary caregiver for the dying, placing yourself at the very heart of the infection. And, in a world desperate for answers, you are also one of the first to be cast as a scapegoat, blamed for the very horror you are trying to combat. When the plague strikes your village or your town, the fabric of society begins to unravel with terrifying speed. The first sign is a sudden fever and aching limbs, followed by the appearance of the telltale swellings in the groin, armpits, or neck. These are the buboes, hard, painful lumps that turn black as the tissue within dies. Death almost always follows within days. The disease spreads through the air, from the lungs of the sick, and through the bites of infected fleas. It moves from house to house, family to family. In this moment of ultimate crisis, the ingrained roles of society dictate your duty. You are the caregiver. It is your job, as a wife, a mother, or a daughter, to tend to the sick. While a man might flee the infected household, trying to outrun the pestilence, you are expected to stay. You are the one who brings a cup of water to the parched lips of your feverish husband. You are the one who changes the soiled linens of your stricken child. You wipe the sweat from their brow, you listen to their delirious cries, you hold their hand as they suffer the final, agonizing convulsions. You do all of this in a small, enclosed space, breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces. You are closer to the disease than anyone else. Your love and your duty place you in the path of a swift and almost certain death. You watch your family die, one by one. You become an unwilling expert in the geography of death, learning to distinguish the rattling cough of the pneumonic plague from the bubonic form. There are no cures. The physicians are powerless, many of them being the first to flee. The priests, who should offer comfort, also die in droves as they administer last rites to the sick. You are left with folk remedies and desperate prayers. You place poultices of onion and herbs on the buboes, hoping to draw out the poison. You burn aromatic woods like juniper to purify the sickroom air, a futile gesture against an invisible enemy. The social order collapses. The bonds of kinship and community, once the pillars of your world, crumble under the weight of fear. Boccaccio, writing of the plague in Florence, describes how fathers abandoned their sick children, how husbands turned away their wives. The living became terrified of the dying. But your role as caregiver often traps you. You cannot abandon your child. You stay, and in doing so, you seal your own fate. When you inevitably fall ill yourself, there may be no one left to care for you. You die alone, on a dirty pallet, your body undiscovered for days, until the stench alerts the death carts that patrol the silent streets. These carts are a grim testament to the scale of the horror. The bodies of the dead are piled up like firewood, their limbs stiffened in the rictus of their final moments. They are taken to massive, overflowing plague pits dug outside the town walls, buried without ceremony, without a shroud, without a priest's blessing. You watch as the world you knew is literally consumed. In the midst of this chaos and terror, a desperate search for meaning, for a cause, begins. Why is God punishing mankind with such a merciless plague? The official explanation from the Church is that it is divine retribution for humanity's sins. But for many, this abstract answer is not enough. They need a more immediate, a more tangible target for their fear and rage. And so, the search for scapegoats begins. This is where your second, perilous role emerges. Any person living on the margins of society becomes a target of suspicion. And women, particularly those who are poor, elderly, or widowed, are among the most vulnerable. Do you have a reputation as a healer, someone with knowledge of herbs? Your remedies, once sought after, are now seen as evidence of malevolent potions. Did you have an argument with a neighbor whose family then fell sick? It is whispered that you laid a curse upon them. Are you an elderly widow who lives alone with a cat? You are accused of consorting with a familiar spirit. This rising tide of paranoia intersects with another, older prejudice, anti-Semitism. Jewish communities across Europe are accused of deliberately causing the plague by poisoning the wells. This accusation leads to horrific massacres, where entire Jewish populations are burned alive by panicked Christian mobs. But the fear also settles on women. The archetype of the malevolent witch, a figure who makes a pact with the devil to harm her community, begins to solidify in the popular imagination. She becomes the perfect explanation for a world turned upside down. She is the agent of the devil's work on earth, and the plague is her weapon. So you exist in a state of double jeopardy. On one hand, you are on the front lines of a biological war, sacrificing yourself out of love and duty. On the other, the more you are associated with sickness and death, the more you become an object of suspicion. Your survival itself can seem unnatural. If your entire family has perished and you are somehow spared, it is not seen as a miracle or a quirk of fortune. It is seen as evidence that you had a hand in their demise, that you possess some unholy protection. The Black Death carves a massive wound in the body of Europe, but for you, it brings a special kind of terror, where the act of caring can be twisted into a crime, and where survival itself can become a death sentence. There will likely come a time, should you survive the gauntlet of childbirth and disease, that you will face the final, uncertain stage of a medieval woman's life. You will become a widow. Your husband, whether a young man struck down by sickness or an old man succumbing to age, is dead. In a world where your identity, your security, and your very survival have been inextricably tied to a man first, your father, then your husband this moment represents a profound and terrifying rupture. Widowhood is not a state of quiet retirement or gentle decline. It is a precarious threshold, a crossroads where you might briefly touch a rare form of independence or, far more likely, begin a slow, inexorable slide into poverty and irrelevance. Your fate as a widow is dictated almost entirely by your social class and the wealth of the man you buried. If you are the widow of a great and powerful lord, you may find yourself, for the first time in your life, in a position of significant power. As a dowager, you may be entitled to control of your dower lands, the portion of your husband's estate, typically 1/3, that was assigned to support you. You can be the ruler of your own domain, managing castles and manors, collecting revenues, and holding court. You are legally a femme sole once again, free to make contracts and plead in court. This is a moment of heady, unprecedented autonomy. But this power is fragile and coveted by others. You are a prize on the political and economic map, a wealthy, land-holding woman without a male master. Your king or your feudal overlord may see your independence as a threat or simply as an opportunity. They hold the right of wardship and can effectively force you into a new marriage to a man of their choosing, a loyal follower who will be rewarded with your lands and your hand. You may be strong-armed into a union with a man you despise, seeing the power you so briefly held handed over to another. Your only alternative to defy this royal pressure is to pay a massive fine for the right to remain single, an option available only to the wealthiest and most determined. Your sons, too, once they come of age, may resent your control over what they consider to be their inheritance, leading to bitter family conflicts that seek to strip you of your authority. Now, let us imagine you are the widow of a prosperous town merchant or a master craftsman. Your situation is similarly ambiguous. The guild may permit you to carry on your husband's business, allowing you to maintain your comfortable standard of living. You are respected in the community, a good wife, of solid standing. But this is often a temporary grace period. The pressure to remarry is intense, both for social propriety and for practical reasons. A woman running a business alone is an anomaly. Journeymen may not want to work for a female master. You need a husband to represent the business in the male-dominated world of the guild and the town council. The suitors will appear quickly, some drawn to you, many more drawn to the thriving business and comfortable home your late husband built. Your brief window of economic independence often closes with a new marriage, returning you to the familiar status of femme covert. But for the vast majority of women, the wives of peasants, serfs, and laborers, the death of a husband is an unmitigated disaster. It is the beginning of a slide into abject poverty. Your husband was the primary source of labor that worked the family's strip of land. Without him, you cannot manage the heavy plow or meet the demanding labor obligations to the manorial lord. Your right to remain in your home and on your land is suddenly precarious. The lord may deem the holding forfeit or demand a crushing fee to allow you to stay. Your dower rights as a peasant widow are meager, at best perhaps a corner of the family cottage, a share of the garden plot, a few chickens. It is not enough to live on. You are now entirely dependent on the charity of others. Your best hope lies with your children, particularly your sons. If you have a grown son who takes over the family holding, he is expected to care for you in your old age. But this is not guaranteed. In a world of scarcity, an elderly, non-productive mother can be seen as just another mouth to feed, a drain on the household's fragile resources. You might be tolerated, but given the smallest portions of food, the coldest place to sleep by the fire, you are a burden. If you have no children, or if they are unable or unwilling to support you, your situation becomes desperate. You have no social safety net. You might be able to eke out a meager existence by spinning wool for others, or by performing low-status jobs like brewing ale or serving as the village midwife. But as your body weakens with age, your ability to perform even these tasks diminishes. Your world shrinks. You are reliant on the parish poor relief, a pittance from the church. You become one of the deserving poor, waiting for a weekly distribution of bread. This slow descent into poverty and social isolation makes you vulnerable in other ways. You become an outsider in a world built on family units. You are a solitary woman, often old, perhaps a bit eccentric from a life of hardship and loneliness. This makes you an object of suspicion. Your poverty is sometimes viewed not as a misfortune, but as a sign of some moral failing. You become an easy target for accusations of petty theft or, more ominously, witchcraft. Any misfortune that befalls a neighbor cow that goes dry, a batch of soured butter, a sick child can be blamed on you. The strange old woman who lives on the edge of the village, the figure of the poor, marginalized widow, and the figure of the malevolent witch begin to merge in the popular consciousness. The end of your life, which should be a time of rest, becomes a twilight of fear, hunger, and vulnerability, where your very existence is a whisper on the fringes of a society that no longer has a place for you. As the Middle Ages draw to a close, the scattered anxieties, deep-seated misogynies, and simmering fears that have plagued your existence begin to coalesce into something new, something systematic and terrifyingly coherent. The long, difficult centuries have worn grooves of suspicion into the collective psyche, and those grooves all seem to point toward you. The localized, sporadic accusations of maleficent magic are about to be forged into a deadly, continent-spanning ideology of demonology. Your wisdom is about to be redefined as witchcraft. Your aging is about to become your final indictment. The closing chapter of the medieval experience for women is written in the shadow of a book that will bring centuries of suffering. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This is not a sudden development. It is the culmination of everything we have discussed. It is the theological framework of woman as the weaker vessel, the heir to Eve's sin, more susceptible to the devil's blandishments. It is the suspicion that has long surrounded the midwife, the woman who holds power over the sacred, terrifying moment of birth and death. It is the fear of the herbalist, whose knowledge of nature's secrets seems to defy the established, male-dominated world of clerical learning. It is the marginalization of the poor widow, whose solitary life makes her an easy scapegoat for the community's ills. All these streams of fear now converge into a single, monstrous river. In the late 15th century, the world is in a state of flux and anxiety. The traumas of plague, famine, and incessant warfare have left society deeply scarred. People are desperate for explanations, for a sense of order in a chaotic world. At the same time, the intellectual and religious authorities are becoming increasingly obsessed with heresy and the power of the devil. They are no longer content to see magic as simple folk superstition. They begin to see it as a coordinated, conspiratorial assault by Satan on the foundations of Christendom. And they conclude that the devil's primary foot soldiers in this war are women. You are the perfect enemy. You are already considered morally frail. You are associated with the body, with childbirth, with sexuality, with all the earthly, carnal things that the celibate male clergy fears and distrusts. They argue that your insatiable lust makes you particularly vulnerable to the devil's advances, that he can tempt you with sexual promises that a man would resist. Your mind, considered less rational and more emotional, is seen as fertile ground for diabolical fantasies. Your speech, long condemned as gossip and idle chatter, is reimagined as the incantations of a curse. Then, in 1487, two German inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, published the book that will codify this rising panic. The Malleus Maleficarum is a bombshell. It is not a book of folklore. It is a meticulously argued, theological, and legal manual for the identification, prosecution, and extermination of witches. It is a bestseller, reprinted dozens of times across Europe, second only to the Bible. It gives educated, powerful men judges, magistrates, and priests intellectual justification they need to turn their suspicions into a brutal reality. The book lays it all out in chilling, exhaustive detail. It answers the question, why is it that women are chiefly addicted to evil superstitions? The answer, it claims, lies in your very nature. It argues that the word femina, the Latin for woman, comes from si and minus, meaning less faith. It paints a hideous portrait of the witch, a woman who has made a formal pact with the devil, who attends nocturnal sabbats, where she desecrates Christian symbols, engages in orgies with demons, and cannibalizes unbaptized infants. It provides a detailed guide on how to conduct a witch trial. It sanctions the use of torture to extract confessions, arguing that since the witch is in league with the devil, she will not confess unless subjected to extreme pain. The world described by this book is a paranoid fantasy, but its effects are devastatingly real. Now, every aspect of your life can be viewed through a sinister lens. Did you mutter to yourself as you walked by a neighbor's house? You were casting a spell. Do you own a black cat? It is your demonic familiar. Were you present at a difficult birth where the infant died? You are accused of sacrificing it to Satan. Are you old, with wrinkled skin and a stooped back? This is the very image of the hag, the archetypal witch. A mark on your schiena mole, a wart, a birthmark is reinterpreted as the devil's mark, the spot where he sealed his pact with you, a spot that is supposedly insensitive to pain. Inquisitors and witch-finders would use long needles to prick your entire body in search of this spot, a deeply humiliating and painful ordeal. With the publication and spread of this text, the legal ground shifts beneath your feet. A formal accusation of witchcraft is almost impossible to defend against. Your denials are seen as proof of your cunning. If you confess without torture, you are clearly guilty. If you confess under torture, the confession is valid because the court has authorized the means to get it. If you somehow withstand the torture without confessing, it is taken as proof that the devil is giving you supernatural strength, which in itself is evidence of your guilt. It is a perfect, inescapable trap. The late Middle Ages, therefore, do not offer you a renaissance or a dawn of new thinking. They offer you the formal, intellectual, and legal architecture for your own destruction. The era ends not with a promise of enlightenment, but with the shadow of the witch hunter and the smoke from the pyre. The medieval world has found its ultimate scapegoat, its final answer to the unexplainable suffering and anxieties of the age. And that answer is you. Your life, which began as a disappointment and was lived as a struggle, now ends under the threat of a new, organized, and righteous form of hatred. The hammer of witches provides the terrifying final word on your place in this world, casting you not just as inferior or as a possession, but as the dedicated enemy of God and humanity. The worst, in many ways, was yet to come.